Okay, so I'm not going to say Del needs no introduction because everyone needs an introduction. Del is a photographic visual artist, as many of you know, who's been working with and making work of LGBT people since the 1980s. They have produced 5 photographic collections of their work, from Love Bites in 1991, The Drag King Book 1999 with Jack Hubberston, and Femmes of Power with Ulrika Dahl in 2008. Del is currently working with Christie Costello, and they will be in dialogue today about Del's work. Christie is a postgraduate at Cambridge University's Art History Department and is working with Del on their work and around the question of archiving in particular. Christie is also a member of the queer art collective Bare Minimum, which is collectively in residence at the ICA at the moment. So as I said, and as you can see from the first slide, the title of the presentation and dialogue is The Erotics of the Archive, a Queer Feminist Methodology Revisited. And I can't welcome you both warmly enough. It's really wonderful to have you with us. So over to you.
Okay, I wanted to start actually by talking a little bit about Christie's work and how we met. I think we met in person at Queen Mary when I gave a talk for their sex course. I don't remember what it was called. It was for Dominic Johnson, and I met a lot of people then, and it was quite intense. So I remember meeting Christie, but we clicked later, and quite recently, really, on a number of levels and some amazing cosmic coincidences. But then Christie sent me the Bare Minimum manifesto, which will be a link available for everyone to read. But there were certain key phrases that really made it for me that I think it would be great if people thought about as we go through this just quickly. So in the manifesto, it says, we're working across mediums with no regard for disciplinary boundaries. We're trying to reject time, listen to images, remain attentive to their frequencies, live lives of pleasure, love wildly, take risk, to wander, to organize, to support and sustain grassroots political movements. Everything we make is contingent, depending on our experience of living in this life, at this time, in this place. We won't run from that. I think I'm quoting Christie here. Yeah, actually, I think it was made in collaboration, but I think I'm quoting Christie here. And Marx and Engels made some points, but so did Claudia Jones, Olive Morris, and others. Our loyalties are always against big male theorists, white social theorists, bros, arrogant clowns who take up all the space. And then finally, point 1, we're not stupid enough to believe that art is limitless or in and of itself transformative. Any art made under capitalism is stunted. And there was another point that didn't make it onto this PDF, but I think it will come up in the thing. So here, I'm gonna click and go to the next. Have I got, no, I went to the next slide there. There we go. So you can read this quote about the vision, not only a passive female receptacle where the real gets photographed, but also a phalloid organ that is able to unfold and erect itself out of its cavity and point towards the visible. The gaze is the erection of the eye. And that was a quote I used in my MA. So this comes from, this image is from a 10-year self-portraiture project that's called Inter-Me, as in intersex, inter-asterisk me. And an expression of my own process of allowing myself to be seen beyond the idealized way I have formerly depicted myself in self-portraits. It's also a sign of the newfound urgency I've been feeling about my body of work and the need I have to frame it for myself rather than allow it to be framed and reframed by others that I've done in every one of my 5 monographs. From Sarah Schulman in Love Bites, Jack Halberstam, The Drag King book, Paul Presadio in Sex Works, Jay Prosser in Sublime Mutations, and Ulrika Dahl in Femmes of Power. I've kind of relied on the kindness of academics to interpret my work. And I love what they do, and I love how they interpret it, but I think it's been an abdication of my own responsibility. So now I find myself collaborating with yet another academic from another generation. Oh yeah, there was a line in The Bare Minimum about you're in resistance to the boomers.
Yeah.
Much to my horror, I found out that I am actually technically a boomer.
Sorry.
I didn't know. I thought boomers were them, not me. So this collaboration actually feels different. And because not only is it intergenerational, it's deeply satisfying because of the way in which we inhabit space in the world and negotiate power differentials based on a wildly rhizomic philosophy that will, if all goes well, become apparent as we go along.
Fingers crossed.
And here, Christie, over to you, because this is a photograph I made 1981 at the farm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these photographs, I've even been dreaming of them lately. That's how much I've been thinking of them. So this is, as you said, a photo that you took in the early 80s at Kate Millett, I'm sure you all know, huge feminist writer and artist, farm in upstate New York, which she turned into the Women's Art Colony. And you were an apprentice there, along with Karen, who's in the photo with Kate, before it became so cemented as an art colony. And I believe you were building buildings 12 hours a day.
I was doing
a huge amount of time. Yeah, good butch labor. So not a huge amount of time for art practice, but you have said that there was a lot of time for delicious dinners and lots of wine and discussions with Kate and all the other women who were at the farm. And I am working in my dissertation, or I have been working mostly on Kate Millett's erotic drawing practice that's been kind of neglected. So most people think of her for her book Sexual Politics, but actually before that and through her whole life, she made a huge amount of visual art and always considered herself to be a visual artist more than a writer. And then I started speaking to you, and you mentioned offhand that you'd been at the farm, and I then made you look for 2 days to find these pictures to scan for me, which you dutifully did. I'm very grateful, because something that has been really important for me in writing what I'm writing is trying to show that there isn't this binary between lesbian art practice and queer art practice, that, you know, lesbian art practice was super essentialist, completely non-sexual, no kind of all symbolic flowers and that, and then queer art was the bad girls doing sexy things, you know, you taking great chain reaction pics later, and that there was this just opposition between the two, this kind of literal interfacing at the farm between this huge queer photographer and a really famous kind of second waver who's sometimes thought of as a separatist at points, but I disagree with that. And a thread that I found between the two of you that I've been writing about recently is you both have what I'm calling this aesthetics of existence, which I'm stealing from Foucault. You know, both of your lives and work have been this series of transformations, of experimentations with the self and ways of living, ways of making, while still acknowledging, you know, the historical limits may be imposed upon your subjectivities. And the way you've gone about that is through your queer feminist methodology, which we've spoken about a bit. And I wanted to ask you exactly how that works specifically in self-portraiture, because in this set of images here, in the background is this motorbike, which is one of what you call your avatars. So you rode this motorbike across America to get to New York, and it's like a kind of metonymic self-portrait almost, which is something that turns up again and again in your work alongside your extensive, more figurative self-portraiture practice. Things like putting people in your clothes, motorbike, things like that. I'm wondering if you could talk about that and your queer feminist methodology as it relates to self-portraiture.
Yes, I think I could talk about that, and I will. I just wanted to just kind of round up a little bit more about Kate Millett, and without being too linear, and we're talking about
embracing the rhizomatic
archive. It's going to come up because I have been thinking about that really interesting question, you know, that you've sent me, and I have come up with a few ideas about it. What I could say very briefly is that everybody is me. I don't have, you know, one of the things we share is, and I don't think you'll mind me saying so, is we're both ADHD.
Yes.
And the difference is you have medication and I do not.
Sorry.
But it's all, and we're both intersex, so there are other connections that we have as well. And I consider myself kind of femme in a trans-masculine way. But in any case, everybody is me. And if I go to this next picture, do you see that of New Mexico? This is women's land. And in a way, Kate's farm was also women's land. And Kate's farm was the first women's land I had ever been on. And I was much more of a worker than an artist, and I got picked up in the Duchess bar where she sent dykes to find dykes who could come up and work at her farm. I was waiting for my friend to see if she would drive her motorcycle back with me, but she stayed in New York. So I brought a lot of dykes up to Kate's farm, but I was actually picked up at the Duchess Cafe or the Duchess Bar. And in any case, this is where I ended up on my way back from New York. I stopped in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And here are pictures that I think also speak to, in some small way, the kind of, the idea of women's land is always seen as separatist. ARF, which I say stands for Asylum for Rowdy Females, was not separatist. Boy children were allowed. It was also not anti-sex. We were all having sex with each other, and some of that was BDSM sex, and that was not taboo. It was also not all white. So there were different ways, and I think that the concept of women's land gets constructed. And because I am in this office, and for the last year and a half, I've been excavating my archive. I have a scanner, I have an office. It's given me a new way of relating to my work and rediscovering it for the first time. And it's massive, much more massive than I remembered. And so part of my joy here is to also bring joy to others. And as much as I can despise Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, Facebook has allowed me to re-find people and to have, I'll talk more about what my objective is with this archive and how I want to get it out there in a bit, but it's also allowed the people, or the subjects, so to speak back and for it to be really living.
Yeah.
The other part of the archive here, this is my flat in Highbury Hill in London, where I lived in a short life house for 20 years. I was blessed, and this is Suzanne Kessler is in 3 of the pictures, one with me, and along with 4 transgenital landscapes. And you have to understand, this is also the backyard where the 3 Graces was photographed. I had a home darkroom. So the idea of home, family, and radical sexual queerness is intertwined in my work. And I can only guess at what the neighbors thought. They looked at these. There was another slide that I'll save, but I also have pictures of Joan Nestle hanging clothes on her clothesline that I wanted to juxtapose with this. But moving swiftly on, because I have a lot I'm excited to share with you. One of my first roles as a photographer was as a theater photographer, but even before that, I was my mother's paparazzi photographer. And this is a picture of my mother with Julian Bond. I'm not sure if they had an affair, but I have a suspicion something was going on there. And God knows what he was looking at when he was looking at me. I have a lot of other photographs of Julian Bond. I was probably 20 years old here. And the pictures down below, my mother was a delegate to elect. She was for Jerry Brown. I think she voted for Jerry Brown, and here she is talking to Jerry Brown's father, who was also the governor of California. So with my mother, I had in the 60s and early and 70s, not only feminist consciousness raising, but also a lot of democratic politics and civil rights experience. Only me, not my sisters. And I'm adding out of time in a different place. This was my mother in, I believe it was 1984 or 1985 at a place called Just Desserts that I had a couple of queer exhibitions in. And these were some of the people who came to my exhibition. In the middle section is me with my lover, Pearl Ong, who I've recently been reconnecting with, which has been great. Like, what happened? Why did we stop going out together? What do you remember, you know? But it's also important to me for other reasons, including how proud my mother looks of me here. My mother was not the motherly type, but she was very charismatic and exciting. And she was really expressive in terms of her love for me. Yeah. And my sisters and my mother who are here, my sister who it says Queen tickets, she was running for Elks Rodeo Queen, my sister Patia, my other sister Tony, I'm the oldest. Both of my parents are the oldest. That matters to me, it makes an impact. And my mother had me when she was 17. So we were all at this stage of our lives, you wouldn't understand that we were mother, daughters, etc. But they were my first photographic subjects. And in my book, The Sublime Mutations, I start off with the feminine principle. And I've been reading some reviews of my work that talk about the feminine principle. And it's interesting to me now, considering Femmes of Power. Also, there's certain motifs that come back. There's the gaze that refuses objectification. There's the grid. That picture with Tony with the grid is echoing other self-portraits in Inter-Me, the intersex grid, the grid by which others are measured by, the self-reflection in the mirror, and the archival, the shot of action with my sister, with Mark Harlick in the Cadillac, and also the flirtation, which we're not going to have time to talk about all of these things, but you know, the way in which I created the space, even in the 70s, which was an erotic space. I find the pictures of my sister with her arms like this, I find it quite sexy, and she was sharing a bit of her teenage sexuality with me. even though it wasn't sexual, there is an erotic element to family that could be interesting to talk about.